I think today the pursuit of happiness has a meaning that's radically opposed to what the founders meant. Today it's just the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of whatever you want to do. It's liberty without any touching point on responsibility. This plays in again to, I think, the radical, fairly radical understanding of the free market as just a random collision of desires and needs that somehow will work out in the end. The advocates of the third way I describe say, no, that's not what you're going to get. You're going to get, unless there's some constraints in there, either internalized constraints among a moral people, or externalized constraints imposed by culture or government. You're not going to get happiness in the end. You're going to get a lot of misery.
Dr. Allan Carlson is our guest. We're talking about family-centered economies. He is president of the Howard Center for Family, Religion, and Society based in Rockford, Illinois, International Secretary for the World Congress of Families, author of several books, including his latest called Third Ways. Our in-studio email address, issuesetc@kfuo.org. Our call-in number, 1-800-730-2727 or 505-7850. 1-800-730-2727 or 505-7850. I'm Todd Wilkin, and this is Issues, Etc. Here's an email from Steve in St. Louis. He says, as someone engaged in the global economy, capitalism is not a family-friendly economic system. A true free market system is more of a Darwinian system where it's survival of the fittest. A truly family-friendly economic system is one in which the role of government is to protect its citizens from the power of business. Steve goes on to say, I find it ironic that many Christians are against big government but are for big business. I place trust in government, to place trust in government than business to protect my interests, since I am protected by the Constitution. With the business, I can't read it. I'll skip the sentence. As one laid off twice from large corporations, says Steve, I have little trust in business to protect my interests as well as my family. Your thoughts there, Dr. Carlson?
Well, I think that is the modern mega international corporation. They don't have the luxury. I'll give them this. They don't have the luxury of being nice to families. They don't have the luxury of not sucking as much energy and life out of their workers as they can because they are in a ruthless, grueling competition. I see it happening in my own town here of Rockford. We just, one of our last major corporations that was locally owned just got bought out yesterday. The local management team all got fired. They're being taken over by a restructuring specialist. And I guess with probably the factory itself will probably be closed in a year or two, and the technology and some of the machines will be moved somewhere else. That's the way the system works, unless there are constraints. And an earlier caller was right to point to the old Sherman antitrust acts and so on. They put some restraints on the ability of mega companies to crush their smaller competitors. And that, together with cultural assumptions about affirming the family wage, together with the United States had a blessed experience in the 20th century. We engaged in 2 global wars and a number of minor wars. We were never invaded. We never saw our industrial infrastructure crushed by invaders. In fact, war usually stimulated our industry. And between 1945 and 1965, most of our major industrial competitors were still recovering from a devastating war. And we had a nice time, a blessed time, actually, in retrospect. And we could afford everybody. The family wage system flourished in that system. And in fact, the middle class was growing, the number of poor was shrinking, and the number of the very rich were also shrinking. There were fairly high marginal taxes back then, and the very rich as a category, were shrinking. We were becoming a much more middle class society, much more like each other, and in retrospect, I think it was something that looks pretty good. It doesn't mean there weren't differences in income, but they were much less than they are today. You didn't have well, say the head of Citibank or something making $200 million or something. The guy actually didn't prove to be much of a leader. The company is just reeling from poor leadership, but he still bails out with $200 million in parachutes. We didn't have that back in the 50s and 60s. It just wasn't seen as seemly or acceptable. So we're in a different system now, where the old constraints have broken down. And the problem with the Democrats is they might put some constraints back on, but their credo toward the family is not very compelling.
Some might say that labor unions have forced big business to become less family-centered. What are your thoughts?
Well, when the labor unions had a moral purpose to them, which I think they did, they were strongly family-centered, and they insisted on a family wage. They insisted that workers be protected as family leaders. And they were mainly talking about male workers, without question. I think they had a moral purpose and a moral compass. I think today labor unions have lost that completely. They're probably worse than the corporations in some respects, because the labor unions have become captive to other political movements, ranging from feminism to socialism. The worst aspects of the labor unions are the public unions, which almost didn't exist, say, 60 years ago, or were very minor. And there, too, we're seeing strange ideologies, say, dominating the teachers' union or the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. They've become dangerous, too. That wasn't, again, true of the old industrial unions and the old trade unions. Between 1830 and, like, say, as late as 1970, they were fervently in favor of protecting workers as family members and family leaders. And that, again, collapsed under the pressure of feminism and some other leftist ideologies that came around with new strength at that time.
Couple final questions then. I was listening to a very famous conservative social commentator just yesterday, and he was adjuring his audience on the radio, trust the markets, trust the markets. The markets will work all this out. He was talking about economic downturns and whatnot. And I think I've also heard him occasionally say that if, the factory picks up and moves to China, then you got to move to where pick up your family and move to where the next job is. What steps can be taken to create a family-centered economy where both government and business serve the interests of the family rather than the other way around?